able to serve up relevant information. But again, this is just sort of happening on the periphery, and that's one thing I wanted to mention. I think other stuff that's happening that's kind of interesting. Well, first of all, when you talk about optimizing content, you have to talk about this whole notion of experimental design and multivariate testing, A/B testing, as a lot of people call it. And the idea there is whether it's for an email, and of course when you talk about any email, there's just so many different visual elements and so many different textual elements that you want to try to get right. So whether it's the subject line or the messaging or the graphics or how things are displayed, you obviously want to do a lot of in-market and out-market testing, trying to get that right. Same for your landing pages, and this is just sort of a very basic idea. It actually goes back to I traced it back to the 1730s when this guy James Lind carried out an experiment on the HMS Salisbury, which was this ship in the English Channel, and we've all heard the story of how some of his men were suffering symptoms that they had loose teeth, they had bleeding gums, and this was scurvy, and he was trying to figure out how to solve this problem. So he gave some men cider, others seawater, some got a mixture of garlic, mustard, horseradish, and then a few guys got spoonfuls of citrus fruits, and of course they're the ones who experienced a remarkable recovery. So we discovered the benefits of lime juice on scurvy, and I think that's essentially what you're doing here, in obviously a far more sophisticated way. You don't want to be serving up garlic or mustard or vinegar or horseradish to your prospects if you can be serving up lime, and lime is the ideal content. This is the most relevant context-sensitive content that you can be showing them. And so I think companies are getting more sophisticated about being able to do this to some extent, or at least they're starting to think about it in a B2C context. I think, honestly, I think what you guys are doing with this real-time ID mapping is really represents the next evolution of content optimization, and I'm not seeing anyone else do that. And that was actually one of the reasons I was really excited to participate in this webinar. So we were talking, you did an analyst briefing with me, and the fact that you have a technology that and I know you're going to be talking about this a bit later, so I don't want to steal your thunder, but to be able to actually identify prospects as they come to your website in a real-time manner and be able to serve up content that maps specifically to their perceived wants and needs based on various firmographic attributes. Again, I think that's huge, and I'm going to let you talk about that a little bit later. So the only other thing I want to say about optimizing content is I mean, what else is going on here? Retargeting is kind of interesting. So the idea is, as prospects come to your website and then they leave, you're creating this anonymous, you're putting an anonymous cookie on the browser, and you can later on serve up different content through banner ads that may resonate with their needs based on their previous browsing behavior. So that's kind of interesting, but I would say that too is sort of in its infancy. So optimizing content, I mean, that's what you want to do. Obviously, you need people. It's an economy of attention. You need to do everything possible to make sure that the content, the offers that you're serving up to customers is indeed relevant. And then on the timing side, so I don't want to spend more than a minute on this, but timing is everything, as they say, right? It's reaching companies at the moment of truth, and there's no greater moment of truth than when they're coming to you. So they're proactively seeking you out. They're looking for something on your website, and that's key. This is actually a science fair experiment that one of my kids did a few years ago, and and I think it illustrates a good point. So when is the right time to hit the ball? And we always talk about event-based trigger marketing when we talk about optimizing timing, and I think that's exactly right. So that's fairly sophisticated in the world of financial services firms. So, if you're a credit card issuer or you're a bank, you have a lot of transaction data, and you can understand, when when there's a major marketing implication, such as a birthday or a new baby or a new car purchase or marital status or becoming an empty nester. You detect these different things, or you can also detect a deviation from a customer's normal purchase behavior, and then you can serve up and offer a message that seems most appropriate. So, I do think that this principle also applies in the context of B2B. If you can identify, what are the right triggers, you can begin to map these out. So that's key. But again, it's if you have people on your website and they're looking at your content, and you can engage them at that moment, that there's no better time to do so than that. So then finally, sort of this last R that I mentioned, right customer. Who is the right customer? And again, this is sort of a concept that goes back, at least 100 years or more. This is Bill Pareto, who I guess is sort of, I'm a big fan of his thinking. He was a Italian economist, the guy who sort of had this big thought that, hey, you know what? I think, based on my research, the vast majority of the world's wealth is concentrated. It's held by a small minority of people, and that became known as Pareto's law, the 80-20 rule. And that's applied to everything. 80% of the carpet gets, 20% of the carpet gets 80% of the wear. I've seen it applied to just about everything under the sun. Certainly, in the context of marketing, the idea is that you're going to generate 80% of your revenues and profitability from 20% of your prospects. And I think the reality of the situation is that it's probably a lot less. So what does that mean? It means you need to allocate your marketing resources to focus on those prospects from whom you're most likely to benefit. And we've heard this over and over, and even we've all heard the phrase, I know half my marketing dollars are wasted, I just don't know which half. That came from a guy, John Wanamaker, a Philadelphia merchant, around the same time. And again, I think the reality of the situation is that it's a lot more than half your marketing dollars that are wasted. You're doing pretty well if that's the case. So when you think about, what's the framework that I need to be using in order to understand where to focus my efforts? That's, especially in the context of B2B, I think that's something that warrants some consideration here. So let's say I'm I'm an office, I'm looking for an office supply operator. So lots of different guys out there. I can go to their websites, check them out, understand pricing, bundling, all that. Let's take an example. Let's take this last one here, a company named Dunder Mifflin. So I'm going to go to their website. I'm going to poke around a little here. I think from Dunder Mifflin's perspective, the onus is on them to identify their best prospects, and that really happens in two ways. It's either explicit or implicit, right? Either people are coming to the website and expressing interest in their products and services, and you can see them poking around, and hopefully you can begin to capture some information about who they are, and maybe that happens with cookies, and you can do some retargeting. Maybe they're filling out a form, which for additional information, which would be an ideal scenario. That doesn't happen a lot. Most people come and leave, but if you can begin to do some dynamic surveying where you're asking them different questions, maybe at different iterations as they come back to the site, that's helpful, and begin to understand, what are their needs, what's at the forefront of the purchase decision ultimately. That's great. It doesn't happen a lot, unfortunately. And then there's sort of the whole implicit thing. Maybe you can learn a little bit about, identify target prospects based on, what they're doing in social media, or as more and more websites are become social media in and of themselves, maybe they're posting on your website. I think a lot of corporate websites are beginning to morph more and more into, what you might just want to call an online presence. with all the Facebook extensions and so on and so forth. That may be a good way to identify who these guys are. Again, I think, well, we'll talk about this later, but, another way in terms of identifying target prospects may be to simply look into your existing database and understand, what are the commonalities that exist amongst my best customers. I call this blueprinting the ideal customer. Look at customer lookalikes. Try to understand, what are those key commonalities. Maybe I can devise some sort of scoring system and generate a roster of attractive customers and map that roster against external databases of prospective customers to see how well the two lists correlate. And if they don't correlate, that kind of portends a gloomy outcome. So, I often tell companies, just try to understand who are your best customers and maybe go out into the rest of the world and look for people just like that. But again, nothing, everything tells by comparison. If you have customers coming to your site, expressing interest, and you're able to understand who those companies are. And again, I can't help but think about what what Demandbase is doing with identifying these companies so that you actually understand who they are, where they're coming from, and being able to fill out some of these firmographic attributes, which is really key here. This is my screen sharing is now paused. Are you still seeing this? Hey Jason, you still see my screen?
I see the Dr. Mifflin corporate headquarters.
Okay, for some reason I got a strange pop-up here. All right, I am going to carry on then. So, this whole notion of customer segmentation, again, I always like to look at, take a historical perspective, and this actually, this whole concept of segmentation goes back to an economist named Wendell Smith, and he wrote that segmentation represents, I actually have his quote here, he says, represents a precise adjustment of product or marketing effort to consumer or user requirements. So he wrote that about 120 years ago. And, the idea of targeting various parcels of people with differentiated offers, that was pretty radical at the time. And it's really been fun, when I in my writing, I've looked at the evolution of segmentation classification schemes over time. And, of course, initially it was around demographics, and then in the 50s and 60s, it evolved into easy to observe physical attributes, and then behavioral segmentation joined the fray, and then I guess in the 80s and 90s we started to see loyalty and profitability segmentation, trying to understand which customers are loyal and profitable, and this is just continuing to evolve, and now companies are thinking about other conditions, and there's this thing called uplift modeling, but I'm not going to go on and on. But when you think about this in the context of B2B, so very different. Obviously, customers, you can understand their psychographic, behavioral, attitudinal attributes. You can marry that with 1,000 third-party databases and begin to paint this very robust, multidimensional portrait of who these customers are, what their wants, needs, situations are, and so on and so forth. So when you think about companies, what information is at your disposal? Well, you can understand company size, revenues, great. That tells you a little bit. And we found that 94% of survey respondents, actually said they're currently doing this, which is no surprise. And to provide a little context here, that's what we do at Gleanster, where we put out surveys and we're benchmarking best practices in technology-enabled business initiatives. So we're trying to understand what are top performers doing right relative to everyone else. So this was a survey that we put out last month, and we've gotten about, at this point, 220 respondents. And one of the questions was, how are you segmenting as a B2B company? How are you segmenting?
Jeff, which slide am I supposed to be seeing?
I'm still on the firmographic attributes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, sorry, I went off on a little tangent there. But so you can look at industry types, you can look at geographic location, and actually you can do that by IP address, right? And that's about the only thing that IP address up until now would tell you is, are they coming from, what zip code? And you can look at market served, you can look at there's other considerations, business structure. Maybe that's important. Is it a franchise? Is it is it centralized? Is it sort of a federated system? Who's making the buying decisions? And perceived readiness to buy stage. So that's pretty sophisticated, and we found that only 19% of companies are looking at readiness to buy stage, probably because it's hard to get that information. It requires lots of analytics and lots of lots of data that isn't readily accessible.